Co-Pierre, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, the eyes of the whole world are on Greece, and recently the editor of City Press newspaper, Ferial Hafiji, tweeted something very interesting. She said that if it weren't for the implementations of Nelson Mandela and his cabinet, and specifically our finance minister at the time, Trevor Manuel, along with the Reserve Bank governor, Tito Mboweni, South Africa may have been in a very similar position to Greece after apartheid, when we consider the sanctions and all of the economic struggles that the country faced. Now, in your professional opinion, is this a fair assessment of where South Africa was compared to Greece?
I think it's not exactly the same thing. It's apples and oranges. South Africa was in a much more difficult and much more severe situation, not just economically, but also socially. The challenges at the end of apartheid were much grander than the challenges that Greece faces these days. With that being said, it's still very difficult times in Greece. Normal people, everyday people, struggle to get cash, struggle to get their pensions, struggle to pay for medicine. So it's going to be a very difficult time in Greece. But comparing those two situations, I think, misses the point of the Greek and the sovereign debt crisis.
I think one of the heartbreaking things in following the Greek situation on the news is, despite the political ongoings, it's those images and the interviews of Greeks queuing outside their banks in the hopes to draw out their pension or their savings. Is that an accurate representation of what's really happening to the Greek people?
I think so, yes. Normal people, everyday people struggle very hard. You have to imagine an economy that comes to an almost complete standstill. There are people buying groceries in bulk, there are people queuing in front of gas stations, because there's this uncertainty about what will happen. What will happen after this Sunday, when there's the final, ultimate deadline that the creditors have set. Will the banks open? When will they open? So all these uncertainties in your everyday consumption, in buying food for your baby, these kind of things, that actually directly affects people. And yes, this uncertainty is very bad for them.
Now, we know that last Sunday Greeks voted no in a vote that seemed to surprise leaders of Europe, especially the European Union. They were essentially voting no to the conditions put forward to them by creditors that would implement even further austerity measures, Greeks saying that those austerity measures have crippled the country in the last 5 years. Now, those are a lot of words and it's a lot of things happening. So perhaps you could take us back and explain to us what was happening in the Greek situation for those austerity measures to be put in place.
I think the key to understand the situation in Greece and in Europe at the moment is to understand that it's driven by domestic concerns. It's driven by domestic concerns in Greece and in Germany. On the Greek part, what happened there was a sovereign debt crisis in 2010 and another one in 2012, and there was a bailout. But this bailout was not done properly. There was never a reduction of the debt, that the overall massive debt that the Greek government has amounted. So the Greek economy never really jump-started. Now, there were 5 years of strong austerity measures, wages being cut, pensions being cut, things that directly affect everyday households. So at some point the voters were just fed up and said, okay, enough is enough, we don't want this austerity anymore. And at the last election, when Syriza was voted into power, that was the first signal that voters just had enough of this. So when Syriza came into power, Greece was just getting better. The economy was in an upward trend, and what Syriza has created in the process was a lot of uncertainty. And a lot of this was driven by the hardliners within Syriza. It's not a monolithic bloc. So there are hardliners that are actually opting for an exit from the euro and from an exit from the European Union. So in order to appease these hardliners, Tsipras at the end of the negotiations had no other chance but to say, okay, we will have this referendum, and I think this is when things really turned haywire. Until then, everything was tense, but you could still have the impression, okay, we can get out of this through normal negotiations, things will be fine. But this referendum has caused a lot of problem. Now, what has happened with the referendum is that Tsipras' hands are tied. So he can't really agree to the austerity measures, and at the same time Germany, which is a democracy as well in the end, has the same kind of hardliners on the conservative spectrum. So Merkel will have a very, very difficult time getting majority for another Greek bailout, which is what they are negotiating about. So the key thing is really to appease the hardliners within your party and actually get majorities in the parliaments. And I'm not so sure that both things will be achievable at the same time. Without that referendum, it would have been much easier.
Kopia, I don't think many of us actually realize that, perhaps not people of my generation and younger, when you say that South Africa was in a more precarious situation than Greece. Looking at the news reports, having people report from the ground in Greece, it really does seem like a dire situation. But let's talk about that more. South Africa was worse off?
Yeah, you have to put it in historic context. Apartheid was a crime against humanity. There was the exploitation of a majority of people by a small minority. And the way this exploitation was carried out was by social and economic isolation. When you look at the homelands, when you look at the way the townships are actually built, it's in order to control a majority, but it's not in order to help them prosper, in order to help them get new skills. So at the end of apartheid, South Africa was in a much worse situation because both the education system was much worse off than in Greece. The complete economic infrastructure was much worse because there was this racist overlay that guided the design of the economy. It was not built for people to prosper, it was built to control a majority of people.
And so, despite the fact that perhaps our banks did not shut down as the Greeks have, or the stock exchange didn't come to a screeching halt, the issues that we managed to overcome then were more significant, as you've described. Now, can we attribute that to good policy when it comes to perhaps our former minister Trevor Manuel, Tito Mboweni, the former Reserve Bank governor? Were they good men who did good things, as many people have been saying?
As much as I admire all three of them, I think it was more good luck than good policy. Especially the economy in the early 90s wasn't doing well. There was a recession at the end of apartheid. It was disastrous. It got slowly better, but it wasn't really an economic success, the first government. So it was to a large extent good luck. I think the biggest distinction is when you come to South Africa as a foreigner and you talk to the people, you realize there's this inherent spirit for let's do something, let's go places, and there's this inherent understanding we can only do it together. The same kind of spirit is missing in Europe at the moment. So given the same challenges that South Africa had at the end of apartheid, I don't think Europe would have done equally well.